knows schedule today. Anyway, my schedule today is next thing's up at 2:30, and that's just casually meeting somebody. So
Good. I thought you were heading into school here in about an hour.
no, that's
Maybe.
my weekends are actually Sunday, Monday. So
Oh, lovely.
which is kind of nice because Sunday you can do things like a normal person. A Monday, everything's like kind of cleared out, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
100%, man. That's awesome. I'm just getting a little bit organized. I'm trying to figure out how to open your document. Hopefully I can open it with Word. Open
yeah, I do everything in
with.
that weird like notebook program that has like no features.
Yeah,
Notepad.
I've got Notepad. There's Notepad. Good.
There we
Very
go.
good. Well, you can see you saw the caveman way I used to get you my document.
Oh yeah. Just
I just
blasting
I,
on in.
I just had to cut it into like I didn't realize there was a some sort of character limit on Discord if you don't use Nitro.
Oh, yeah, I think I hit that once when trying to post something of I don't remember what, but
Something something with extreme prejudice.
yes, exactly.
Hang on just a second. I'm gonna change the lighting real quick just to make it a
Okay.
little bit easier on me. That's a little better.
There you go. It's like the warm filter on your iPhone or something.
Something like that. Again, for the poor man. Well, good, man. Well, thanks for having me back on the show.
Yeah, this should be a good one to go through. It missed one additional watch because yesterday for lunch I was like, I'm gonna put on a Twilight Zone. So I asked my daughter, "Do you want the creepy one, another one on an airplane?" Because we had just watched the Shatner one, and
Right.
being and of course being this one or the funny one because but she was like the creepy one. So we watched The Invaders, which wasn't good for her English because that episode has no dialogue.
Oh, that's a really good point.
On the plus side, well, people will hear when I do the episode later this week, but pants in Japan is underwear, right?
Yeah,
Like you say pants, you're saying underwear, and then
got it.
because there's no dialogue. Whenever Agnes Moorehead's character makes a sound, they describe it. So it keeps first it says just pants, so she starts giggling, and then it's like pants
Like that,
loudly,
yeah.
Then right. But my daughter's like pants, and that's like pants loudly. So she was having a good old time with that.
I bet, man. That sounds like fun.
Yeah. So yeah, she laughs at horror, so I guess that's cool.
That is
I, I
cool.
I've mentioned a few times before we put on The Shining and last year, and when Scatman Crothers takes it, my wife who's scared of everything, gasped like you're supposed to, and my daughter just started laughing.
That was my kids always too. Like I don't know, like I really thought they were disturbed for a while. Then I realized just so many people their age are like react that way to it, probably because of the campiness or the oldness of it. I'm not really sure. They know the difference between real and make believe is probably another skill they have. But yeah, like when they were watching like American Horror Story and stuff when they were littler, I was just like, this is fucked. What are
Well,
they doing?
also like I mean with Kubrick, Kubrick's a funny guy. He has a reputation of having no humor whatsoever, but the fact is the way that's staged in The Shining, it is kind of funny.
That kind of is, one of the funniest things I saw about in that movie was when they were heading, I think Scatman and Crothers featured prominently in the scene. They were in a gas station. They were trying to get up the hill during the blizzard and get to the resort. And there's some dude like trying to drive like a Trans Am or a Firebird or something like that, like rear wheel drive, sliding all over the place. I'm like, that's the horror story right there. Like
Yeah.
that's the only kind of cars I've pretty much ever driven, or GM rear wheel front engine cars. And they weren't going anywhere that night.
Yeah, I got to change my tires twice a year up here in the mountains. So, which actually I need to do next week probably. So, but yeah, like I'd never watched Barry Lyndon because that had like, that when you look at it from the outside, it's like, oh, this is like the driest movie ever. And you watch it, hey, this movie's funny.
Yeah.
the first scene's on, I'm like, wait a minute, what? So, but the reputation of the movie, I guess, because it's like, oh, they use candlelight and as lighting and use these like
Right.
NASA lenses and stuff. So it's like, oh,
Uh-huh.
it must be very dry and academic. And then you're like, ooh, no, and it's really long, right? So,
Right.
but
How's your Discord live chat thing going?
we've only done it twice.
Okay.
The first time we had two, second time we had four. That's not bad for a start.
Yeah.
So
That's about I've had I think the most of like 6 or 7 maybe doing the Orville rewatch.
yeah, 5 or 6 is pretty much
Sometimes it's
what
1
I
or
would like.
2 though. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, 5 or 6 seems like kind of perfect to me because sometimes on the After Dark there's like 20
Yeah.
people and
Oh, I know. Too much. And
what
I've kind of stopped showing up there just because I don't know. One is too busy anyway. For one thing, nobody goes anymore. It's too busy. And it was sort of a bad time the last couple of weeks. And I've been having a harder time keeping up with Voyager. I gotta tell you though, there's a little bit where I feel like I'm just sort of being preached at for an hour.
no, what I tend to do myself is it's my breakfast time. So
Yeah.
if you've been on, you'll note I don't have my audio and video on because I'm just sitting there eating
Mhm.
breakfast and treating it like a radio program that if I really
Right.
have something to say, I can bump in. But yeah,
Yeah.
and it's nice to show a little participation, I guess. But yeah, I've noticed a few other people kind of like hang out, but they're not really active participants. So
Right.
which is pretty much where I'm sitting on that for the moment. But yeah. As far as the Monday morning ones, yeah, every other week because otherwise I'd be doing it right now. But
Yep.
but and that makes sense too because it's 25-minute episodes, and it makes sense just to chat 30 minutes about one, chat 30 minutes about the other.
Yeah.
And usually there's another 20
Perfect.
minutes about God knows what.
Oh yeah, and that's what we often get into.
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
the God knows what stuff. And they get like, sorry, we're getting off topic. I'm like, no, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry at all.
I just posted responding to Spencer in the Discord. Yeah, these Twilight Zones. I'm like, look at the running time. I can promise you 30 minutes will be like laser focused on the show, and anything past 30 minutes is up for grabs.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, there was an episode a few weeks ago that was 30 minutes, and we just talked about the show. Then we're finished. So
Awesome.
It wasn't the deepest episode, to be fair. It was what was that? Oh, a most unusual camera. So it kind of one of the ones that's a little goofier. So okay, I guess we will go ahead and plunge on into this one. If you're ready, I'll just leave about
Sounds good.
5 seconds of silence so I can spot it in the sound file easily. Hello, welcome to Time Enough Podcast. It's where we talk about episodes of The Twilight Zone and beyond. This is Matt here. Joining me today from the Mission Log Orville podcast is Captain Mike Richards. Got to put the captain on today.
I think it's funny that is nothing that comes completely from external to myself.
Yeah, I know.
Which I've kind of learned to live with, but I would never introduce myself that way. So
no, that's why I'm introducing you that way because today's episode is Odyssey of Flight 33. So it's a fitting space to do that. Have you flown a Flight 33?
Oh, I'm sure I have. The numbers kind of run the gamut. Usually flight 1 to about 6,000 are used for commercial purposes. Above that, you start getting into things like ferry flights, charters, things like that. But believe it or not, the airlines have, a rhyme or reason to the numbers that are assigned to flights. And it usually kind of starts with lower numbers like 1, 2, and 3, like Transworld 1. When I was back in the day when I was at TWA, kind of circled the globe going one direction, and Transworld 2 circled the globe going the other direction. And then they had flights 3 and 4 and 5, and they kind of went up from there. Other airlines, if they're just flying around Texas, the flight 1 probably goes makes a little triangle. Flight 2 probably makes triangle in the other direction. East and west, odd and even is kind of a convention also.
Yeah, I felt stupid last year. I was reading a book and only like just learned about the interstate system in America. Like if it's generally north to south, it's an odd number. If it's generally east to west, it's an even number. And if it goes around the city, it's a 3-digit number.
Yeah, and I guess they just sort of looked at it like a graph because as we all know, kind of life and history and settlement in the US kind of started in the East and went west in many ways, the colonization anyway. But this grid system kind of looks more like you're looking at a graph. So starting in the Southwest United States, you got the 5 in LA, right? And then you got 15, 25, 35 until you get all the way out to the East Coast. And what runs up and down the East Coast is I-95. And then east west, there's 10, 20, 30, 40, starting with the south, and up around Chicago, you've got I-80 and I-90 that run through that way. So it goes that way. It just always seems so backwards to me that it starts in the Southwest when, I don't know, I'm from the East Coast. So I guess I kind of think of everything revolving around me there.
Yeah. Well, excuse me. Oh, I totally lost that train of thought. So let's get into the skies.
Flight numbers, everybody.
Yeah. I can't even claim the you're on daylight savings time, which addles everyone's, or off daylight saving time.
Yes, we are now on
everyone's brain.
And, standard time. There's a move to stay on daylight savings time all year starting this spring. We'll see what happens.
Well, I as someone who's lived in Japan for 12 plus years, I very much like not changing my clocks. But yeah, for the podcaster at this time of year is slightly stressful. It's like, am I going to get the person on at the right time?
Oh yeah. So living in Indianapolis like I do now, we only started changing our clocks in about 2010. So everybody else would spring forward and fall back, and we were just always on Eastern Standard Time all year round, which meant that in the summer months we were essentially even with Central Time. And when we were on Eastern Standard Time in the winter months, we were same with New York when they were on Eastern Standard Time. So we kind of flip flop back and forth, with which big city we sort of associated with. And it was kind of nice because I never had to mess with it. But flight schedules would change by an hour, and shows would start an hour off, and things were just weird. So it's easier now. I just kind of like I just want to be the same as man. I just want to be the same as everybody else. That's all I want to do.
Well, yeah, now you got Zoom and you just plug in the time and it translates it to your own time. And you're like, so if you screwed up it, much faster. Back when we had to do Skype, I definitely had people off, I'm like, oh, I'm an hour early or something. So better to be an hour early. And that was
funny. You were more plugged into it than I was, because you were like, hey, don't you, isn't that the last day of daylight savings time? And I'm like, man, I don't know. Maybe. I was like, just set up a Zoom appointment. It'll tell me what time to show up.
Yeah. A little dread for me. For this episode, the original air date was February 24th, 1961. The script is by Rod Serling, though he did get a lot of input from his aviator writer brother, Robert Serling. This apparently helped in the authenticity of the cockpit dialogue, and you can agree or disagree with that as we go along.
Wholeheartedly agree. Spoiler.
Okay. The show happened in great part because American Airlines had created a mock-up of a Boeing 707 and solicited for Hollywood types to come and shoot there. Rod readily accepted the offer. And I saw in your notes, you were mentioning that a seat was missing on either side. So they might have just scaled it a bit, to save a few dollars.
Right.
You were saying they should have 3 seats on each side and they only have 2, but maybe since it was a mock-up, they were like, well, we can reduce the scale a touch and people won't notice. Captain Farver was played by John Anderson. We've already seen him in a passage for trumpet, and he will make 2 more trips into the Twilight Zone. His career started on Broadway, which evolved into a 4-decade stint with spots on all the TV shows. One of those things where I'm not even going to start typing the names of them. His final spot, though, was on Quantum Leap, and he was commemorated with a dedication on the official soundtrack album for that show. Paul Comey is First Officer Craig, and we've already seen him skybound in the episode People Are Alike All Over. Of course, he'll later show up in Star Trek's Balance of Terror as the somewhat bigoted Lieutenant Stiles.
It's a good thing there is no room for bigotry on the flight deck nor the bridge. So
he's a class
Stiles
act
is right at home.
Class act in this one. Yeah, maybe not in Balance of Terror, but... The navigator in this episode, Magellan Hatch, is played by Sandy Kenyon. He worked the TV scene of the time, notably with a recurring role on The Americans. A few decades down, he voiced John Arbuckle for the first animated Garfield special, Here Comes Garfield. So I thought that was kind of weird.
That is.
Especially would have been what, like 60 something at the time doing John Arbuckle. So that was a
Yeah.
little bizarre. But hey, that's what, it's a voice. You can still have James Earl Jones do Darth Vader when he's in his 90s. So
Yeah.
and it's reasonably effective. So yeah, I guess we should talk about a little bit what's right, what's wrong, because the Twilight Zone notoriously makes hash out of space travel. So in part because there wasn't space travel yet, right? So they
I was going to say, in their defense, they were kind of inventing space travel.
But now we have air travel, which is more legit in 1961. So how did that pan out?
So, with the jet age, the 707 launched in 1959. And there were some other corporations that built similar aircraft at the same time. There was a de Havilland Comet. There was the Douglas DC-8, and they all kind of were about the same vintage aircraft. Highly swept wings. Generally 4 engines mounted under the wings, although the Comet was a little bit different. But it was high altitude, it was high speed, it was leading edge technology, and I think it just sort of captured the imagination of people, as well as sort of the maybe some aspects of fear. But man, I really thought that the aviation scenes were extremely well done. I used to do a little bit of flying across the North Atlantic when I was with Trans World Airlines. And even though it was the 90s and not the 60s, and the 2000s also, but not the 60s, a lot of the procedures were the same. I mean, when they cut onto the flight deck, they were doing a position report. And that's something that you do because there's no, the radar out over the ocean, it can't go that far. So you're not under air traffic control with any kind of radar. So you report your position, and there's somebody that you're talking to on the radio that kind of plots the positions of all these airplanes and make sure that nobody's going to hit anybody else, basically. But crossing the North Atlantic about every 10 degrees of longitude, which ends up being about 45 minutes at those latitudes, that if I got that right, it's about every 45 minutes to an hour, you report your position, then give an estimate for the next one, including the time and your altitude, and the name of your next fix. And then they also threw a little meteorological report in there too, of temperature, weather, and things like that. And that was spot on. I mean, I would love it if I was watching modern shows that got aviation as right as this did.
It's almost, yeah, it's like this is kind of a infomercial in disguise. You said the 707 debuted in 1959.
Meticulously engineered and designed.
It's like they kind of tricked Rod into doing their commercial for them. But I mean,
yeah, what do you say?
He had a good script for it or whatever. So whatever, everyone wins in the end. It's like,
there was, I'm sure there was some sort of conversation with American that said, just make sure the people don't think there's anything wrong with the plane. And that line was put in there of, this airplane is perfectly designed and engineered. So I bet that was probably part of the agreement to use American's mock-up.
Although Rod was notoriously, persnickety with sponsors coming in and telling him what to do. Although in that case, like, whatever, I can write a story where the plane works fine. So
yeah.
Few years later, the plane definitely, it has a gremlin ripping off the engines to make it not work fine. But
there's nothing wrong with the plane. I mean, that's just an angry gremlin. What are you going to do? That's funny. You mentioned the Navigator, credited with the first name Magellan.
That's right.
Is that interesting? Okay, because we all know Magellan, the Navigator, right? Circumnavigated the globe.
He personally didn't.
Well, it was part of a team. Let's get that right. Part of a big team. But when I was a new first officer on the McDonnell Douglas MD-80, getting checked out by an old salty seasoned vet, we just sat down. He started calling me Magellan. Did that for the whole entire trip. may have known my actual name, might not have. I don't know.
May have been a
At
fan
the
of
end
this
of,
episode.
yeah, at the end of the he may have been at the end of the trip. He signed my paperwork, and I was good to go at that point. So it didn't matter a whole lot to me. But yeah, in fact, one of the flight attendants came up and said, "Hey, what time are we gonna get there?" And he's like, "I don't know. Why don't you ask Magellan over here?" So as soon as I plugged into this and rewatched it for the first time and not terribly long, probably the first time in a few years anyway, I just kind of chuckled at that opening scene.
Yeah, I read a book about that journey a few years ago, and I think they set off with like something like 3 ships and 400 people, and I'm probably wrong on both those numbers, but something of
But
that.
lots of
And
ships, lots of people. Yeah.
yeah, and showed up, like 5 years later, something with like 18 people. Again, all those numbers are probably wrong, but the general feeling of it is correct.
And Magellan, which was one of them that survived.
Oh no,
I
no,
take it.
he no,
Oh
no.
no,
He tried
no.
to make
Okay.
himself a god in the South Pacific and got himself killed.
That's funny because we'll get to that later on, maybe when we're talking about some of their notes down the road. The flight attendants look great, man. That look just like vintage 60s flight attendant uniforms. They wore it well. Honestly, I was a little freaked out when one of them just walked into the flight deck. I was like, whoa, hey, you can't do that. Then I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess they could do that back then. Yeah. Kind of
As we go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, obviously, that's all changed quite a bit in the last 20 years.
Yeah, that caught me too, because well, yeah, actually, that was you could bring little Timmy up and ask him if he likes gladiator movies before 9/11, right?
Yeah.
As we plop into the story of this a little deeper, could you give me a quick reading of the prologue, which I believe you can now see?
I can see that. You're riding on a jet airliner en route from London to New York. You're at 35,000 feet atop an overcast and roughly 55 minutes from Idlewild Airport. But what you've seen occur inside the cockpit of this plane is no reflection on the aircraft or the crew. It's a safe, well-engineered, perfectly designed machine. And the men you've just met are a trained, cool, highly efficient team. The problem is simply that the plane is going too fast, and there is nothing within the realm of knowledge, or at least logic, to explain it. Unbeknownst to passenger and crew, this aeroplane is heading into an uncharted region well off the beaten track of commercial travelers. It's moving into the Twilight Zone. What you're about to see, we call the Odyssey of Flight 33.
All right. Now that you've read it, there's almost like a little commercial right smack in the middle of the prologue.
Yeah, there sure is. It's like, oh, save your phone calls, folks. The airplane's fine.
But and to that effect, yeah, the flight crew is cool as a cucumber throughout this entire episode, as opposed to as we're talking, the Back There episode of this podcast just went on live, and that's another example of someone. Well, the image I used is the Professor Russell Johnson, wildly banging on the door of Ford's Theater, like not doing well with his time travel experience. So these guys, yeah, they do it kind of Starfleetish, right?
They did, man. And that captain it was funny because, as he started off, it was just so kind of stereotypical of kind of the ego that many, many airline pilots have. Well, thanks to great teamwork and my expert flying, we're going to be on time, even a couple of minutes early into Idlewild today, which, by the way, is now known as JFK, John F. Kennedy Airport, for those of the listeners that maybe didn't know.
I noticed, I didn't put it in the trivia because it was too in the weeds, but it seems like people did. Oh, I'm thinking LaGuardia. It's LaGuardia, right?
There's
JFK.
two. Yeah, so the two main airports in New York, in addition to Newark, which is in New Jersey, is JFK and LaGuardia. And JFK was formerly known as Idlewild.
Okay. Oh, there we go. And LaGuardia, I guess, had just some different name because I was knowing that it didn't officially get the name until it was open for like 8 years, but it said people just 2 weeks after it opened were already calling it that. So.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, but apparently it was LaGuardia in 1939 because that's when they were talking about LaGuardia.
Right, but it wasn't officially the name. But that's what everyone called. That's what everyone called it anyway. It's kind of like how we still call it, or a lot of people still call it the Sears Tower in Chicago, even though it's
yeah. You spell Series Willys.
Yeah, if Ferris Bueller calls it the Sears Tower, then you call it the Sears Tower.
That's all there is to it. Man, the speed though, I mean, there was a couple of really neat references to speed where the captain was like, whoa, I just got a sensation of speed. And then he even said, well, it's gone now. And then dude in the back, that's also a commercial for wearing over the ear headphones or earbuds or something in the back of an airplane. That British, I think he was a naval officer who was getting talked at by some woman for far too long. So you could tell he was not wanting to listen, but he picked up on a sensation of speed too. But then he even clarified, he said, well, not speed, acceleration, because you can't really feel speed unless there's something relative to you, right? Yeah, another car driving next to you or the wind or something like that. But you can feel acceleration, right? You get pushed back in your chair, you change, that sort of thing. So they did kind of draw that line. I thought that was smart to draw the distinction between, a sense of speed and a sense of acceleration. I also liked the distinction that they made between airspeed and ground speed, because when they were starting to go over 900 knots and then 1100, I mean, they said their true airspeed was 470 knots at one point. To get up to 900 knots of ground speed, that means they would need 430 knots or approximately 500 miles an hour of tailwind to get up that fast. And Styles, you ought to know better, man, because he was a navigator on the Enterprise. I mean, it wasn't for another couple of years. I get it. But even as a co-pilot for Global Airlines, he should have known that ground speed and airspeed are two different things. And he mentioned the wings coming off, and the captain was like, come on, kid. Ground speed doesn't matter. It's our speed through the air that matters. And that's why they weren't.
He's got a good 5 years to go to the academy and learn that, right?
Yeah, he does. He'll probably, they usually teach stuff like that in Captain Upgrade, though. So as a co-pilot, you probably didn't get that. You probably didn't get that training yet. But man, they got over 3,000 knots at one point. They said, which is impressive, man. That's New York to LA in an hour.
Wow.
Which was.
Because we hear about speeds in space, right? How fast the Voyager probes are currently going, that sort of thing. Right. And those numbers just sound insane. Again, because there's nothing there. So
yeah. And I know, I remember reading, at one point, the shuttle, I think 18 to 20 something, low 20,000 miles per hour upon reentry. So when it first kind of starts to skim the atmosphere, it's going about 20,000 miles an hour, if not a little bit more than that. So super fast.
This might go in the white people all look the same bin, but I was like, if you add the three guys on the flight deck together, except for the co-pilot who looks different, you get Daniel Craig.
You kind of do, and it's funny. 60th anniversary of James Bond this last month of October. So all of the films, all of the Eon films anyway, were available on Amazon Prime. Watched them all. Finished last night with my wife, with Spectre and No Time to Die. It was a lot of fun. It really was. I will probably save this for your Sci-Fi podcast coming up in the future. But yeah, so I've had some good looks at Daniel Craig lately. And when I saw that note on there, I just laughed. But yeah, they did. Man, the captain, he had great pipes though. I mean, he had such a commanding voice. Really enjoyed kind of the gravitas of the character that he played in this episode.
Now they kept mentioning speed so much, and of course you couldn't in 1961, but could the in-flight movie be Speed? Is that reasonable? Because you don't show crashing planes on a plane, right? You don't show any air trouble in an in-flight movie. It's like, but Speed it's still like public transportation. So
I think car crashes are okay. They do, as you know, like to stay away from hijacking and air disaster films.
I guess because that movie has kind of a plane feel and that they can't really get off the bus, right? So I was like, would that one be okay? Would that one be okay on a plane?
It definitely kind of does. The other line that I loved that the captain said was, ours is not to question why, into the valley of public relations, and reluctantly picked up the handset to make the PA. which is kind of funny because, you know, as pilots, we like to fly the planes, right? And we're kind of technically oriented, and we are you know, try to maintain our proficiency at flying the airplane. But there's this other part of the job too, where you have to calm passengers or maybe deal with passenger issues, or, you know, lately, sadly, there's been a lot of passenger misconduct. So, you know, that's part of the job too. It's not necessarily the part of the job a lot of us signed on for. Some of us are people and do like, you know, communicating and chatting with the folks and providing that level of customer service. I'm one of them. That's why I've always preferred to, and will always prefer to, fly for a passenger airline rather than a cargo airline, someplace like FedEx or UPS, because I do enjoy that. But you could just tell his, I got to talk to these people about this. And it just kind of made me chuckle. I was like, wow, 60 years later, not much has changed.
Are there any captains that are like notorious for like monologuing to their passengers, like they don't shut up?
There are, you know, and the problem is that when you've got 150, 200 people in the back of the airplane, there's gonna be a subset of the audience that loves it. So, I mean, I flew with a guy, you know, all over the country, and he was always on the PA pointing out historical sites and geological, you know, facts and geographical facts. And, you know, I think 98% of the people got off the airplane and they're just like, oh my God, never again. But 2% of the airplane would walk up to him and say, which is like 4 or 5 people, and say, my God, that was the best flight I ever had. That was amazing. Thank you so much. And he would just kind of puff out his chest. And now he's just proven to himself, reinforced the fact that he's the best captain ever for monologuing for 5 hours.
No, I just have this image of some guy like going on about his lost love.
Oh, there's hey, you know, you get the captive audience. You know, you want to take advantage of that.
Well, I had a in high school, and I won't name names because he was a pretty good guy. He was in a bad place this particular day. Showed up possibly drunk, giving us a test, and he'd just gotten a divorce. That's why I'm like, he was probably in like a real bad spot. So the extra
Right.
credit question for the quiz that day was, when was my Independence Day? So we're all like, okay, this guy's not having a good day here, or he's having a
Nope.
great day. I don't know, but
Maybe I would. Yeah, I can only I can only speculate gladly on that. Some days I think I know how I'd feel about that. But I did like the after they got that big jolt, which I think they were going faster and faster and faster. I don't really know, but they got that jolt. I think that was them traveling through time, like maybe hitting the time barrier.
slingshot around the sun.
Yes, exactly. And well, I just so many things there, but I'll stay away from it. So I think that was them going through the time barrier. And he said, well, I got to say something with the people. And he said, we've flown through some clear air turbulence. I was like, cool, that's a thing. That's a term we still use. It's turbulence not associated with thunderstorms or anything visible. It's just can happen at any time. Clear air turbulence, and a atmospheric phenomenon. And I was like, ooh, I like that. I'm gonna have to use that. We flew through some clear air turbulence and atmospheric phenomena.
Save it for someone flatulent in the cabin, maybe.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say that could be anything. I mean, that's a get out of jail free card, man.
I wish I could come up with a specific example, but some of the like theme park codes for problems are like pretty wild, you know, because they don't want to be like somebody just had a heart attack. They, you know,
right.
Yeah. And they just have like, depending on the ride, you know, it might kind of be themed to whatever it is, but the staff all knows what that means.
Yeah, I mean, there's folks that won't say turbulence on the PA. They'll say rough air. They won't say, you know, thunderstorm. They'll say rain showers. I actually pretty much agree with that sentiment. You won't, if you've got some kind of mechanical situation on the airplane and you want crash fire rescue to come meet you. One, they call it air rescue firefighting now. So it just doesn't have the same gravitas to it. But most people say like the safety equipment's going to take a look at the airplane before we get off the runway, and not say crash fire rescue.
Yeah. Okay.
At least that's how most of the industry's trained anyway.
I was just thinking of just sitting on the plane, hearing that, and kind of like looking around to see people's reactions to that one. Like I don't think it personally bugged me, but I totally want to see how everyone else is responding.
Exactly. Another nice touch was when they decided to descend, and the captain told the FO, is like, all right, we're going to descend. Get the horn button, I think he said. So a warning in jet aircraft, because if you pull the power all the way back to idle, you could very quickly develop a very high rate of descent. And if that happens sort of down close to the ground, or more specifically, kind of like right when you're getting ready to land, if the landing gear is not down and you pull the power back to idle, then you get this horn to warn you. The intention is to warn you that the landing gear is not down. But they weren't smart enough to kind of build parameters into the system yet at this point, that you really only care if the gear's down if you're below about 1,200 feet or so. So anytime you pulled the power back all the way to idle, for example, to descend, that horn would enunciate. So as if they were as good a team as Rod Serling sold them as being during the prologue, then the captain probably wouldn't have needed to tell the co-pilot to hit the horn button. But it was a nice. I actually thought it was a nice touch.
Well, so as the layman, I guess what we're thinking about is at this time the jets are pretty sparsely high altitude, so they're coming down to where all the other planes would be. It's kind of like a Mack truck pull onto a country lane.
Yeah, so that was the fear when he said, "All right, we're just gonna have to start down." And Craig, maybe his name was Craig Stiles. I don't know. Did you get a last name for first officer? I didn't Craig?
No, I just assumed his first name was Daniel.
Okay. The one guy that doesn't look like Daniel Craig was named Daniel Craig. Yeah. Awesome. But he was like, we can't do that. There'll be lots of other airplanes down there. And he said, you got any better ideas? Hit the horn button. Yeah, that was the thing, is that they were flying way up there. I think they 33,000 feet in this one. They're capable of flying even higher. But it was time to start down. They couldn't stay up there forever. Which got me thinking, sort of, we had a 707 simulator at my college, and we would fly this thing around. And to the best of my memory, and I did a little sleuthing around on the internet, each engine burns about 3,000 pounds an hour. Now, when you're taking off or you're climbing, you get the power way up there, it's probably double that, closer to 6,000 pounds, but just kind of cruising along, level flight. Whether you're down low, going kind of slower, or up high, going pretty fast. I think that 3,000 pound per hour per engine is a pretty good number, which means 12,000 pounds an hour, right? 4 engines, 3,000 pounds an hour. So even if you round that up, even if you go like way high on that and say 16,000 pounds of gas per hour, the number that the flight engineer gave of 49,435 pounds, which, man, that's a good gas gauge if you got it down to 5 pounds, that's still 3 to 4 hours of fuel. And they were acting like fuel was pretty critical. So I'm going to say that this 707 probably burned more fuel, and fuel was more critical than they made it sound out to be. But to climb back up, punch the engines, get going, over 900 knots again, like they did, and then have to do that twice. That's getting pretty dicey.
Well, it really is. I guess also in years after it, you would have had more fuel efficient 707s even, right? Or can you? They did re-engine those airplanes. They went from turbojets, which are those real skinny jet engines that were on there. They did get 707s have gotten re-engined a number of times with different models over the years, and they have gotten more fuel efficient as they've gone forward. The numbers I was looking at was on those older 707s. Okay. So, at least that's what I was trying to look at. Anyway, I'm going to like your math on that. So
yeah, I would think about 12,000 pounds an hour, sort of a cruise, but if it was up around 16, considering that they had to do some climbing and accelerating and then coming back down. You just don't really use a lot of fuel on the descent is, another factor. But still, man, if we came out of the clouds and I looked down over, Manhattan, Staten Island, and the West End of Long Island, which is, now Brooklyn and Queens, and saw a Vegisaurus staring at me, just eating leaves off a tree, man, that I would have freaked out. That would have been that would have been it for me.
Yeah, that's where I'm like, these guys keep it pretty cool, right? It's like they already had read the script, maybe.
They do, yeah. So it wasn't definitely 100% shock. They knew what was coming. I guess in more modern storytelling or a different way of doing it, they could have kept it secret from the actors, kind of like with Van Wormer in Animal House, and kept the next scene a secret, and they would have had to react to the Brontosaurus.
They would have been reacting to the ridiculous models. This is, like you start working out the budget of the show. It's like, okay, American Airlines is basically giving us the set for the week. This movie Dinosaurs from 1960 are giving us these ridiculous stop motion dinosaurs. That's the shot it's very charming, but didn't age particularly well.
Which I think it's funny that it was probably the most expensive part of the shoot, honestly.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that airliners had a crew of 5 back then, which was legit, right? There was a pilot and a co-pilot, aka captain, first officer, flight engineer working things like the fuel system, air conditioning, the aircraft systems in the back. You had a communications officer, that was the guy making the radio calls, and you had a navigator, the guy who fortunately was named Magellan, which is a great, where you're kind of pigeonholed if your parents name you Magellan, I guess.
I assume it's Magellan in quotes, just like you got the name Magellan, right? But you definitely don't want to stop in dinosaur land and on any, in any sense of the word. I mean, hey, maybe they can't even quite breathe the air there for all we know. So,
yeah, that's a good point, because exactly, it's a really good point. The other thing that I thought was, you talked about how quaint that scene was. We just did on the Roddenberry Podcast Network Sci-Fi 5 coverage of the film Trog, which was Joan Crawford's last movie, and it was about a missing link, half man, half ape, found in a cave, and through some psychotropic drugs and hypnosis, there was a scene of him remembering back in the day, which he ironically or incorrectly could remember some dinosaurs fighting. This scene of the dinosaur was better than that scene of the dinosaurs, just to let you know.
Okay, because a couple years ago, we did the Valley of Guanji. Guanji is the dinosaur anyway. That's is it Harryhausen? It's Harryhausen or someone adjacent. I think it is Harryhausen. And those his dinosaurs still look good. They're weird looking, but they still look good.
Right.
So it's like you put a certain, if there's enough creativity in a questionable effect, I think it still plays. In the case of this episode, maybe not. Perhaps we make up with that with our stock footage of the 39 World's Fair in our next time jump, because that's some candy for the eyes.
That was so funny. He was like, "Do you know what that is?" And I'm like, "Stock footage of the 39 World's Fair."
And I'm like, "So land."
Yes. So, it's so funny that you brought up Magellan, who I didn't know this, that he stopped somewhere on one of the islands and tried to make a god out of himself. I'm like, land. Yes, land. Have a jet aircraft, have all the knowledge of the future. You could be like Biff. You could go back. You could crush it. You could absolutely, what stocks to buy? Land. Do it. That would have been my solution.
You'll eventually catch up with your loved ones in 1961 and you'll be rich.
Yes, that's right. They'll be like, you look older, but man, you're balling.
And you get to ride the original Futurama.
100%, man. That would have been awesome.
No, I guess they have a certain amount of responsibility, right? So they got to get you got to land your passengers in the same year that you took off in, unless it's like right on New Year's Eve.
Did you mention the soundtrack in the trivia?
I did, and I think it actually was stock. It worked.
It worked great. Yeah.
I'm even thinking at the risk of making my computer dumb down. I'm going to double check, but I think it was a stock soundtrack, which kind of surprised me because it really did fit the story well. Like I've said on a few episodes, the Twilight Zone tends to be a third commissioned soundtracks, a third repurposed soundtracks, and a third what's in the library. And I think this
Right.
actually was a what's in the library episode.
Man,
So
it sounded great. The most powerful memory I have of this episode wasn't necessarily the first time I saw it. Um, because I was much older than that. I was probably in my late teens or so. I think I had just started flying light airplanes in training, and that sort of sign off um, by Rod Serling was just so powerfully haunting that it just stuck with me. With the music as it faded out was just so good.
yeah. So definitely had a nice connection there. So I'm just gonna have to trust my memory was that it actually is stock, but if I don't have the ability to double check at the moment without going across the room and grabbing my iPad. So
No,
um
no, it just worked. That's the great um the great the great part of it. A couple of things that have not changed at all in the airline business since then and now. Flight attendant asking, not asking, but making the point that not only do you have to be an honorable man if we are to go out, but you also have to be single. That needs that always seems to be made clear. I am married. I'm not in the practice of taking flight attendants out or asking them out, but when I do chat with them, they're always like, yeah, so and so went out with this guy for like 3 months, then found out he was married. I was like, how do you keep that? How do you like show? I want to know. No, I don't want to know.
they're not
How do
how
you?
much.
Yeah, they're just not home much, I guess. But yeah, I thought that was funny. And single being the operative word. And then also, flight attendants asking the pilots to make a PA. You would think that the passengers would listen to a flight attendant who picks up the radio and says, "Hey, we're getting some bumps. Captain, turn on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please sit down." Or if they say, we're getting ready to land, please, we're going to come through and collect any trash and stuff like that. And it's amazing how often we're kind of asked to, "Hey, could you make a PA?" Because they're just not listening to us, especially in kind of a non-routine situation. If there's a mechanical delay, if there's a weather delay, if there's something where there's just a little bit more um, technical knowledge needed, because the skill sets of flight attendants is phenomenal. They know how to do so many things from first aid to de-escalate things to evacuate an aircraft. Like what they do is very specialized and very important. They're highly trained and professional. But if they need to communicate something about the weather or an aircraft malfunction or an air traffic control delay or those kind of things, specifically then is when they ask us to make the announcement, and that makes sense. But I kind of got a little bit of a sense of, wow, that hasn't changed when the flight attendant asked the captain to make a announcement.
And if you'll look out to the right, you'll see a pterodactyl flying alongside us. Give him a little wave.
And if you look out the other window and you see a gremlin on the wing, that's just the B plot, folks.
We have other things to deal with. Yeah. What's is random time travel or gremlins on the wing worse? I don't know.
That's a great note. I want to definitely give you credit for that. I just looked down and saw your note that said if Shatner was on the flight, it would be the B story.
Yeah. Oh, that's my own thought. Okay, cool. Being spat back at me. I love when that happens.
Yeah.
And just to
I'm
rankle a
looking.
few feathers, my final note, which maybe belies you mentioning the closing is creepy, which I was like, oh, they could have closed with Dr. Samuel Beckett never returned home.
And spell it wrong.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess this plane does make it home in the end. So because it has to, because it's trying to sell the Boeings.
I guess so. So is that your is that how you sort of envision this in your head canon, that it makes it home?
Well, actually, no, I'm not sure because of my last note. So
Yeah. I don't know, man. I've always had this sort of really haunting feeling that I'm going to go outside some night and just hear what doesn't sound like a modern airliner, right? They have a very different sound with those turbojet aircraft, those straight pipe jet engines. That I'm going to go outside one night and just hear those like howling, on a windy, overcast night.
A
And
nice
I'm just
ghost
going to have to
story.
shoot up a flare or do something, because that's flight 33 and they're trying to make it home.
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe I think they might eventually make it home. It was just so wonderfully burned into my memory.
I'm just thinking of the one where the Simpsons Halloween special where Homer is going through multiple realities and finally settles on with his toaster, right? And finally he's like, oh, they all have like fly tongues. Like, ah, close enough. So maybe they'll get close enough. Again, 39 World's Fair seemed close enough to me. Just they probably have some awesome food there.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. I mean, you saw my notes. I'm like, yes, land. Because like we can't land at LaGuardia. It's only got 5,000 feet. We can't land in 1939. I'm like, not with that spirit, you can't. Yeah, you can.
So you crash the plane a little bit.
You'll be heroes, dude. Airplanes run off the end of the runway at LaGuardia all the time. Like chances are they'll be fine. And then you'll be gods.
Yeah, there we go. Let's do a few questions on this episode. I think in this case, who went into the Twilight Zone is a relatively easy question. Do you want to go any further than this plane?
Yeah, the plane and everybody on it.
Yeah,
no, I don't think so.
And you outside at night shooting a flare. I guess if you are that person, you're a Twilight Zone adjacent, but they don't appear in this episode. So
true.
Yeah, you were not in this one, if I remember correctly.
Any possibility of this being a delusion by one of the people on there? Since you brought up Ferris Bueller's Day Off, there's the fan theory that the whole movie was just a Cameron fever dream. Could this have been a sort of a hero delusion from the captain? I don't think so. Yeah, I think the whole plane went into the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, and once they start seeing back in time stuff outside of the windows, that's pretty much where we're like, okay, that seals the deal. The captain's not just flipping out.
That seals the deal. Yep.
So the next question. So we'll talk about the crew, talk about the passengers. Do they deserve this trip into the Twilight Zone? Because again, Dr. Samuel Beckett, I mean, he brought that upon himself to continue quantum leaping forever, whereas these folks were just trying to get to New York.
I don't think they did. If there was some foreshadowing of, this plane's not ready yet, or those kind of tropes with new aircraft types where the test pilot's going to the manufacturer and saying something's wrong. It's too fast. We're flying too high. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Then I would say, yes, this, no, well-trained, crew working together as a well-oiled machine, flying, using the right procedures, using the, correct terminology. No, I think they were doing all the right things. I don't think they deserved it whatsoever.
What did they mention where they had flown from? I don't remember if they mentioned that in the episode or not, because now I'm like, maybe they were flying above the Bermuda Triangle or something.
No, if they were going from they were talking to Gander Control, which is kind of an air traffic service or air traffic control facility that you speak to crossing the North Atlantic. That those procedures are essentially unchanged as far as I know to this day. And they're sort of a radio relay station. So no, they weren't near there. I think they must have been flying somewhere from say Western Europe, or at least overflew Western Europe before crossing the North Atlantic. But I don't think they ever said. I think they just said en route to Idlewild.
Okay. Yeah, because that had me wondering, and I'll date my last viewing of the film Millennium by saying I rented it on VHS from a West Coast Video. So the last time I saw it, so I don't remember much. But I think that if I remember, that movie has them specific Bermuda Triangle crossing or something.
Oh yeah, and it I'd like to say Cheryl Ladd never looked so good, but Cheryl Ladd does not look bad in anything she has ever done. Even in that film.
But yeah, I almost wondered, like, do I need to watch that film again? Just because I was like, does that actually riff from this? I can't remember because
just as research for this.
Oh, I would no, I did not have the motivation that far, but it did have me like kind of curious about that one again for other weird time tripping passenger jets.
Right.
Let's put this episode on the tripometer. 0 is not trippy all. 5 is very trippy. Decimals are fine. Interesting noises are fine. What do you want to give it?
0 through 5, you say?
Yeah.
Boy, time travel. The only thing that I could somehow sort of think about was, there was so much talk and breaking the sound barrier was such a big deal that the only thing I could think was that this is some sort of hypothetical time barrier that they hit, which is an interesting concept. You go fast enough, you go back in time, you go fast enough, going the other way around the sun, you go forward in time. I don't think time travel is really anything new at that point. I think applying it to, an airliner going way too fast, I don't think it was super trippy, man. I'm thinking it was like a 2-point, maybe like a 2-point square root of 2.
Okay, yeah, that's a good, not quite a decimal, but yeah, I can take it. I'm saying, man, me and math is weird. Like I wasn't that great at math at school, but decent enough. And then about 15 years ago, I was teaching English and math, and my math skills were like real sharp for up to
Nice.
like up to trigonometry. I didn't know. I've never had calculus, but yeah, I can barely compute numbers in my head anymore. I've lost the skill. It's you got to use it or you lose it.
It's true. Yeah, there used to be some pretty. I used to. Yes, I agree. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. So anyway, I was sitting there trying to actually work out the square root of 2, and I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. I guess it's like 1.66. I don't know.
I think it's
giving up. Okay.
Giving up.
I'm gonna go higher because for me the atmospheric conditions of this episode were pretty trippy. So I'm gonna take it all the way up to 4.5, subtract a point for the dinosaur, and then add 0.5 for showing me the 39 World's Fair and settling on a 4.
That's, I like the way you showed your work. I mean, that's very important in math as well. Not just to give the answer, but how'd you get there? And that was good.
Oh, that's why. No, actually, that's why I would get bad scores in my high school math classes, because I just I do it all in my head and just write the answer down. But that's why I just did. I didn't write it down. I told you it, right? So
yeah, no, that was good stuff.
But I'm notoriously bad for not showing my work, actually. But yes. Everyone just heard my work on that, and we're settling on a 4 for this because it does have a bit of trippy. One weird thing on the back end of season 2 of the Twilight Zone I've been noticing is they are like kind of pushing a little harder and allowing something totally whack like the dinosaur or the space guys and the invaders just to look ridiculous. I don't know if you watched the Invaders recently, but it looks like they picked up like a plush Buzz Lightyear toy from Disneyland and just kind of stuck it on screen, and someone's like pushing it from behind.
That just makes it so much better.
Oh yeah, you just gotta love it. It's like, okay, this is how we're gonna do it. We're not gonna do any like actual screen optics or anything. It's just this is what it is. So they did a little stop motion here, so that's cool.
It was good.
I think the production did borrow the stuff from Dinosaur and do it themselves. They didn't like take it from that movie.
Okay, that's interesting. Back to Trog with our coverage of that. Those dinosaur scenes were co-opted from another production that they purchased that footage from a documentary that was produced for the time of the dinosaurs, and used that, and it was not good.
But maybe trippy. I'm sure Trog has to be pretty high on the trichometer.
Oh yeah.
I think I've seen it, but it probably would have been around like the year 2000 when they, like they suddenly MGM in particular just started like dumping caught films every other week, and you'd stumble into Best Buy and be $10, whereas the new releases are 20. So it's like I'm watching weird caught films. Now you just
Heck
watch
yeah.
them all on YouTube, but
Yep.
but you watch few of them, some like you mentioned watching all of Bond on not Netflix or whatever you watched on. But for me, I would never get through Bond that way. I got I got the set from when Skyfall came out, so I have everything up to Skyfall. Don't have the last two Craigs, but I would just flop
Nice.
into disc and do it that way.
Yeah, it was, and you can probably edit this out, but when I was in grad school, I was kind of like hunkering down at home, kind of trying to get my graduate research project done. And it was that time of year where I think TBS was showing 2 films a night. Now at that point it was pre Pierce Brosnan, post Timothy Dalton, pre Pierce Brosnan. So there were only 15 films, plus Casino Royale and Never Say Never Again, which whatever. But for like about an entire week, I was just, those movies were on, and I was just trying to kind of process my research into something that made sense, and just that time period just I just kind of wanted to revisit and watch all the movies again while I could, and it was a blast. It really was.
Yeah. So I'm not gonna. We need Bond talk. Like I said, 30 minutes of a focused Twilight Zone talk, and the rest can go wherever it needs to. So now that we're talking, you got to give me your favorite Bond film. I don't need to know your favorite Bond. I want to know your favorite Bond film.
I think Skyfall.
I can almost agree with you, but I'm still angry at that movie for killing the fan theory that James Bond is a code name that all of these guys get.
So it's interesting because I view watching the other ones all the way through. Bond, I don't think there is any doubt. I mean, there could be doubt, but I think the films from Sean Connery, Lazenby, Moore, and Dalton, and Pierce Brosnan, it's all the same character. There's references to the wife, there's references to the past, it's I believe that all of those actors played the same character, and then Daniel Craig Bond was a reboot. Right? They started that off in the beginning and promoted him to 00 status after he got that second kill, which was easier than the first. But so that was the first sort of true reboot. And the rest of the films, really, I mean, I don't know how James stayed so fit for 40 years, but 30 40 years.
Marvel
but yeah,
Comics
that was
continuity.
Yeah, but that was all, in my mind, as far as I could read it, watching the movies one after the next, inside a month, that was all the same character. And there was some, go ahead.
Oh, that's why I was bringing up Marvel Comics, because if you look at the original X-Men, Scott Summers Cyclops is clearly 18, and around in the mid 2000s, he's clearly made to be like 35. It's like, well, that doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work. And then there's X-Men Evolution, where it's like, contemporary, but they're all in high school. It's like, whoa, hey, whoa, that's not my Cyclops.
Yeah. So I'm not going to say it's the best Bond film by any means, because it's definitely not. But the one I watch most often is Moonraker.
So there is something that the one thing that I do miss in Craig Bond is that sort of charm, that boyish charm. And it's a tough thing to pull off. I think Roger Moore relied on it too much. I think, honestly, Pierce Brosnan probably struck a really good balance of badassery and sort of British charmingness and aloofness. Whereas Daniel Craig was just pretty much full on badass. the whole time. So I think films like Moonraker, and For Your Eyes Only are just a wonderful amount of fun. The opening scenes on those films are just so outrageous and so in your face. And then the Bond theme plays before they roll the opening credits, and it's just so much fun. And I think the Daniel Craig movies missed out on a little bit of that kind of naive, sort of boyish fun that the other films had.
Quantum of Solace hints at it a little bit, but then they kind of pulled back and got more serious after that. So
Right.
And I find that one to be quite underrated. But the fun thing with Moonraker is I have a friend who also considers that basically his favorite Bond film. It's like, yeah, I love the first half, and then I kind of get bored. I'm like, oh, the second half is the part I like when they're all in space and it's the whack effects. So,
Yep.
but then he reminds me that he drives a gondola up onto the street. So I'm like, okay, yes, that's cool. Okay. Yes. People, hey, people that watch a Twilight Zone probably want to hear a little Bond talk every now and then. So
I can't blame them.
we could dig that, and we are like an hour in on this one, so little Bond bonus for you that I'm going to leave that in because I want to hear about it. So, but pulling back into Twilight Zone land and for your podcasting land, what's up on your scene these days? I know we're hopefully between Orvilles, or we might be past Orvilles, but
Yeah, so it's tough to know. I mean, we had a great run. We covered all 36 episodes of the first 3 seasons and a number of supplementals. We had guests Andre Bormanis, Tom Costatino, David A. Goodman, and Seth MacFarlane all guest on the show. Most recently, we covered the novella "Sympathy for the Devil." So that's available on the Roddenberry Podcast Network as well as anywhere you get your podcasts. Coming up, hearing some rumors that there might be some good news coming the next week or so. So maybe by the time this drops, we'll hear something. And we're doing a rewatch on the Mission Log Discord Wednesday nights, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific, where we're about just coming up on episode 6 right now, as of this recording of season 1. So watching an episode and then kind of discussing our coverage on Mission Log the Orville. If you want to join that, patreon.com/mission log, just kind of join at whatever level works for you. That'll give you access to the Mission Log Discord. And we have our live chat on Wednesday nights. Matt, I know you're doing something similar.
that's right. I do it on the Mission Log Discord, so I don't mention every episode, but because there's like the Mission Log crews there, but people that do want to hear your stuff, get into that. Sundays with currently it's going to be 3:30 p.m. Pacific time, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. While you're on Standard Time is time enough to chat on Sundays, and we talk about mostly about the 2 episodes that most recently aired on the podcast, but just as this episode proves, tangents are fine, and if we end up talking about Bond for 15 minutes, that's what happens. So come on in. We just started a few weeks ago, and it's been fun so far. I've been tasked to find the Twilight Zone CD soundtrack, which is apparently a Japanese only release from like 1990 or something. So it's a little bit of digging for that, but hey, I might find it because I find weird things often. Time Enough Podcast. You can find us, or find me in particular, Time Enough Pod on Twitter or Facebook. The reason I don't always mention the Mission Log was because then we have our own Patreon, which makes things a little confusing. But if you would like to support us that way, that's Podcastio Podcastius, which brings you in to get early episodes of this, Matt and Luke's Sci-Fi Sanctuary, some gamer stuff with Luke Loves Pokemon, Monster Mash, and the Game Show. So it's a little convoluted at the moment, but it's all fun for me at least. So hopefully it's fun for you.
It's fun for me.
Okay, that had to be my weirdest plug because I'm trying to balance all of this together. But again, like I've been having a great time on the Mission Log Discord, and this podcast is extremely welcome and has some very groovy fans on that Discord. So definitely got to give that a shout out as well. So what year do you want to land your next plane in?
Man, if I could have landed that plane in 1939, I would have done that. I think I would have done that in a heartbeat. Prevent World War II, make things worse. Just kidding, right? They always say that, right? You go back, you try to make things better, you just end up making it worse. No, man, I think this is peak Mike right here, man. I think it's only downhill from here. So if I was gonna land my plane, I'd land it right now in 2022.
Okay, sounds good. Although I personally would like to take a stop at the 67 Monterey Pop Festival first, but
yeah, that'd be pretty badass.
Watch the show, get back on the plane, then I'll land in 2022 or whenever.
Refuel.
Okay, I guess I'll cut there. Refuel seems like a good place to cut. Yeah. Hopefully my plug didn't come across as too weird because I'm like, I got 2 tracks here.
Well, so. I don't really want. I'm kind of more. Yeah.
It's like I want people to come and talk on the Discord too. So yeah.
Well, I hope I didn't paint you into a corner or something with that.
No, not at all. I basically I'm like when I have mission log people on is when I'll bring it up. And I have you guys on relatively often, so it gets mentioned in like 40% of the episodes. So
sweet.
And actually, I do have you penciled in for one. Maybe I'll hit you again in December or something. But
okay,
just on my schedule, I have you penciled in for 100 yards over the rim, which is a very different time travel. I think that's probably why I penciled your name in because it's also time travel, but like very different.
Good.
So
that sounds fun. And Burgess Meredith is back in the next episode because I like that Paramount Plus keeps the the coming attraction footage.
Sorry, I keep thinking of him showing up at the end of the season for the Obsolete Man. But yeah, Mr. Dingle the Strong, which I haven't watched or recorded yet. I'm going to do that. That's going to be one of the ones that hopefully is not too windy because I'll do an in-person one on the side of a mountain with my iPad.
Oh, nice.
But
but yeah, I'm glad to do that one. Oh, Cliff Robertson's in that one also.
Oh no, I watched that one about a year ago, right when I was getting the idea to do this podcast, and that was definitely a standout one. I started the podcast and then I was like, I'll just jump ahead and watch like some of the end of season 2, so I'll forget it by the time it's time to podcast, which basically worked. So good call on my part.
Good. Yeah, when I started doing the Orville, I kind of started watching ahead, and then as we were doing the shows, I was like, especially like if I kind of went off script, like if I got off my notes, I was like, well, didn't this happen? No, that hasn't happened yet. Fuck. So then after about, I stopped doing that after the first few episodes that we recorded. I was just like, no, I'm not watching ahead anymore because otherwise I'll just kind of start mixing stuff up. It might be different with when you're doing an anthology series, but still, I mean, I can see you making references to still like, I mean, if you're talking about this episode and you watch the 1-2 after it, you wouldn't probably want to bring that up in this episode.
Yeah, I think I've kind of like I had to like kind of glance down and make sure the invaders had already happened when I
right.
I haven't recorded the podcast yet. That's Thursday morning for me when I'm going to do that. So it's, I haven't done that podcast yet, but yeah, that will have aired like 3 weeks before this one. So I don't necessarily record these in order, but I can follow trends through the seasons doing all of them. Like I mentioned, I'm like, oh, now that we're getting in the back half of season 2, they have all these like kind of wacky, cheap effects more and more. Because culminating in will the real Martian please stand up, I think so.
Do Martians have 5 fingers? Put the middle left finger on each hand up.
right. So we're getting wackier and wackier kind of effects coming through. And then the first season had all these like Hollywood Babylon guest stars, like, and then the second season seems to have like tons of people who look like other people. I just done which one was it? It was 22. I did 22, and at the end of that,
I love 22.
Yeah,
it has Arlene Martell in it.
And in the end, she goes into the airport, right, to get on her plane and talks to the ticketing guy who looks just like Connor Trenier.
That's
And then
funny.
and then she walks into a guy who looks just like Matt Smith.
Oh fuck! How do they know that?
It's so
It's funny.
weird.
I started watching classic Doctor Who a few months ago. I'm on season 6. I'm but just about done with Patrick Troughton. Um, but the very first episode, um, they're in Coal Hill Elementary School or whatever, Coal Hill High School or whatever it is. And there's a woman that looks just like Clara Osborne. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it kind of actually made me think time travel exists.
Yeah. They got that squared away. Let's put some seeds in now, and they'll sprout in a few decades, that sort of thing. Yeah. But yeah, just a lot of people who look like other people in the season. So we just keep pointing that out. A most unusual camera. The guy comes across as like J.K. Simmons, you know.
Oh yeah.
So
Yep.
that's kind of fun. Just I mean, things that obviously are just like connecting dots that don't need to be connected because that
Sure.
obviously doesn't make sense. But hey, the Twilight Zone is a good place to be like, that's
Yeah.
temporarily weird.
Oh yeah. No, that's the perfect place for it. Question for you: level of profession preparation and things like that I've got. I mean, you've seen my notes. You've seen is that any critique or
Oh, no problem at all. I mean,
any suggestions for improvement or anything?
no, I have some people that don't even show up with notes, so
Yeah.
which is fine. I mean,
Right.
like Andrew, he's does a rewatch of these like every year anyway. So I'm not even
Uh-huh.
sure he watches the episode all the time before we do the
Oh
show.
yeah,
But
if he's that familiar with the material, then he probably doesn't even need to. Yeah, I'll usually just kind of watch it through. Talk to text on my phone, and then just kind of give it a quick edit and throw it up on the board.
no, that's
Um,
fine for me. One of my other co-hosts that shows up regularly, Mark, he will send me notes. He'll send me notes for everything. A few times he sent me notes, and I didn't send him notes. Like I made him. Like Matt and Luke Sci-Fi Sanctuary. I never show Luke my notes anymore, and um,
yeah.
actually on Zoom calls I barely look at them anyway because we got
Okay.
a guest, and
Yep.
the time I use my notes the most on that one is I'll physically print out a copy when we're sitting on the side of a mountain doing those episodes. But there's no
Got
guest,
it.
so sometimes I need to look down and have something to say. So, but no. As far as your level of preparation, you're above average. So,
Thank you, sir. The other thing I didn't get to talk about was yeah, you're cleared to land, and we're gonna need to see the captain in the office. Like that is still such a real world thing. I had an incident happen to me a couple of number of years ago where we went back to the gate because there was just something going on with the passenger, and it was just sort of not really sitting right with me. And then somebody found something tucked under the seat, and I was just like, all right, this is just getting too weird. So I went back, deplaned everybody, had them come out and check the airplane, got the green light to go, went flying, got to the hotel that night, kind of wrote up the incident, got it to my chief pilot. Because at that point, I was working for an airline where they just sort of believed whoever they heard, whatever story they heard first is what they ran with. So I wanted to make sure they got my side of the story first. So the next day I was done with the trip. I got back to base and the chief pilot's secretary's at the jetway and she's like, hey, you got a drug test. And I was like, oh shit. Okay. And she was like, and Tom wants to see you in his office. I was like, okay. So drug test first, went down to his office later, and he actually was complimentary. He was like, man, I read your report. It sounds like you did all the right things. Like, really nice job. And I was like, really? So I'm good. I can go now. And he was like, yeah, I just want to tell you nice job. I was like, fuck, that's thank you. But yeah, I was just like, yeah, you're getting drug tested, and the chief pilot wants you in his office. I was like,
yeah, it's kind of a double whammy.
this can't be good.
I guess my similar story would be 2004 when I first started working in Japan, and it was a
Mhm.
like 1 or 2 week training thing, and it's like maybe a dozen trainees kind of in this house, right? So
Right.
kind of a dorm situation, but it was the day before everyone was going to do their teaching demos, and I was like, we went out to dinner, and then I went back. I was like, yeah, I want to get rested, be able to do this. I watched a bit of a Marx Brothers film, went to bed.
Mhm.
That night, there must have been a mosquito in the room or something, just chewed up my face. Um, so meanwhile, about five of the other trainees had gone out and basically had a most of an all-nighter at a izakaya, the pub, Japanese pub. And then
Sure.
one of the guys coming home stumbled over a cinder block and screwed up his face. So
Oh
the
my
next day
God.
they called us both into the office, and or maybe it was one by one. I think it was one by one, but they were like, did you guys get into a fight or something? Because that's not cool. And I didn't know what I looked like yet, so I was just like, well, I just looked over my lesson, watched a bit of a movie, went to bed, and then when I finally saw a mirror, I was like, oh,
Ooh,
that's
that's
cool.
why.
Yeah,
That's
and the yeah
that's funny, dude.
those five people did not give very good teaching demos either. So
Yeah, that's I'm not surprised. Well, all righty, sir. I will let you go, I guess.
okay. Thanks as always. And like I said, I'll probably start buggy and I'll see what your December schedule says, and we'll line up that next one.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Okay, hitting the record.